There we go.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2017 Small Farms Winter Webinar Series. It's hosted by the University of Illinois Extension's Local Food Systems and Small Farms team. My name is Nathan Johanning, and I'm one of the local food systems small farms educators, and I'm housed down in southern Illinois in Murfreesboro. And so we appreciate you joining us for these webinars, and we always do our best to try to begin and end within the space of your lunch hour. This is kind of a tight time frame for sometimes a lot of information, and so we will limit your questions to the chat box you'll find on the left-hand side of your screen, and we hope you appreciate and understand why we try to do that, just to keep the flow of the presentation going and be timely all in the same time frame. So we'll make every effort, of course, to get around to just every question that we possibly can. So this presentation will be recorded, and we will be emailing a link to the archive presentation as soon as possible after the webinar concludes. So there will also be a short link for a online evaluation for this presentation, and we really do appreciate your feedback. That helps us when we're trying to guide future webinar series and other programming. So with that, would like to introduce this week's presentation from Andy Larson, who's a fellow extension educator of mine stationed up in Ogle County in Oregon, Illinois. He has degrees from Notre Dame, U of I, and Iowa State, and has over around 10 years of experience in extension, a little in Illinois here, of course, and also a little bit in Iowa as well. So with that, and of course, Andy is a small farmer, I guess, so to speak, as I am as well. So Andy deals in the poultry and egg side of things, so he does bring some grounded experience on the farm himself to this. So with not further ado, Andy, I'll turn it over to you, and we will go from there.
Thanks much, Nathan. Yeah, as grounded as I'll ever be. Head in the clouds, feet on the ground. Hiya, folks. Glad to be here on sort of the other side of the responsibility today. Nathan, I appreciate you moderating, and as usual, I appreciate you guys being here. So you get to hear a little bit more about my area of expertise, if you want to call it that, or if you wouldn't mind calling it that. And that's helping people get going into the business side of small farming. One of the things that I have to do at work an awful lot is talk with aspiring farmers about the type of farm they'd like to have. I consider myself sort of a lifestyle and commercial farmer at the same time. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but what we do probably still has lifestyle benefits that are over and above the income and business benefits. But so we have a free range egg enterprise, and that keeps my wife extremely busy while she's home raising our kids. We treat it like a business, but it still has got a lot of lifestyle benefits. We want to raise our kids on a farm, all of that kind of thing. So I'm here today to talk with you about that interesting point in time where you're trying to decide whether this farm stuff that you're doing as a pastime that you enjoy, whether you should continue to do it at a hobby scale or whether you should kind of double down and see if you can make some money at it. You're probably going to go back and forth with this discussion for a while. It took several years before my wife and I decided to make that transition. But I bet many of you will probably, because you're here, I bet many of you will probably take the leap at some point. So hopefully I can help you be more prepared for that leap. So what I want to cover today, you folks, you agricultural entrepreneurs, I want to help you understand why you might consider starting a farming business. I'll get you a better handle on the financial side of getting started. And also be aware there are some nitty-gritty details at the end of this. Some things about insurance and taxes and accounting and some of that. I'm not going to go in any kind of depth in any one of those topics because it would be their own class on their own. But I am going to try and get you a sense of the full scope of the things that you need to keep track of. Why start a farm business? So I ask myself this regularly, and you guys might have friends or family going, why in the world would you want to start a farm business? And the answer, I mean, at least in part, should be because there is some money to be made. The other side of that same coin is that you're tired of money going out and not coming back in. You've all heard the old saying about how to make a small fortune farming, right? And that's to start with the large fortune. I'm trying to avoid that particular set of circumstances with you. There are, of course, some income tax advantages into being a business versus a hobby. But is the tax write-off for that new Kubota that you're wanting to buy, is that really worth the time and effort of starting and maintaining a business? The other side of this is we have to be honest with ourselves. There are more dependable, less variable ways to make good money than farming. Okay? You do have to consider your opportunity cost. If you weren't farming, depending on your education and your experience, what could you be making at a town job in salary, in benefits, and all that kind of stuff? Even factoring in the sort of soft values on quality of life, can an agricultural enterprise compete with that? For some of you, the answer may be yes. For others, it may be no. And there is nothing wrong with keeping a day job. There's nothing wrong with starting a farm while you keep a day job. It's busy, but more than half of the farmers in the United States actually have a day job in addition to their farm. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, there are some handouts for this presentation. If you click the little computer monitor icon and click on attachments, you'll be able to download those. Those are all educational material from ATRA, and they are all about farm financing, farm accounting, farm profitability, useful little pieces that are sort of companions to this presentation. So feel free to download those as you see fit. Okay. Income potential aside, there's a bajillion reasons that people I talk to cite for wanting to start a farm business. You know, living the country life and working outdoors and getting my hands dirty and growing food for my family and being my own boss. Yeah, and those are all, they all contribute to the decision. But there's a few things that I really want to see when someone is making the decision to actually make a go of a farm business. One, I want them to know that there is an unmet demand in the marketplace for a farm product that they have the capacity of producing. They have to have thought about their marketplace a little bit and hopefully done a little market research. We'll talk about that some more. I want them to have skills and resources that are pertinent to the farm enterprise they want to start. We'll talk about that in more detail. And the third one is passion. I want to know that they love this, because most of the time, if there's not a serious fire in the belly for the farming, there will come a day where you will wonder why on earth you are doing it. So this set of things: market demand, skills or experience, resources, personal, financial, physical resources, plus the passion to do it. It's the combination of those things that are going to allow for success in an agricultural enterprise. So I tend to work with two different types of folks when I'm having these beginning farmer consultations on the phone or in person. One is the person who's already started something up. They've already started a farm enterprise at the hobby scale. It could be vegetables or poultry or hops or mushrooms or goats or sheep or whatever, and they want to build that up from the hobby scale to the business scale. The other type of person are those folks that just have an absolute passion to farm, and they don't care what kind of farming they do or where exactly they do it. They just want to be farmers. Believe it or not, that latter type of person is actually a little bit easier to work with most of the time, simply because they tend to be really flexible. They can evaluate the needs in their local marketplace and choose that enterprise accordingly. rather than trying to, shoehorn a farm product into a marketplace that may already be saturated with said product. Or maybe the marketplace that they're servicing simply isn't demanding whatever it is that they're already producing. In which case you have to start thinking seriously about your marketplace and what you produce and where you go to sell it. So, let's begin with the physical and financial resources part of the algorithm here. Okay, so people are saying that they can't hear anything. Let me check with Nathan. Want to make sure I'm... Okay. So people are mostly hearing. Okay, very good. I will keep going. Resources is a general term, but clients that I talk with usually begin the discussion describing physical resources. So what is on their farm place if they have one? So just as an example, when my wife and I moved to our acreage, we had 3.5 acres of pasture, we had barbed wire cattle fence, we had this little crappy wooden 2-car garage type of building that needed to be either renovated or burned, and a couple water hydrants, and maybe a few like garden tools that we had amassed over the course of the years. So you got to think about, okay, those are the things that I have to begin with. What fits? And what kind of constraints are there on the options that actually fit? We could have started a market garden, for example. But we need some more equipment, some tractors, some irrigation. We'd also need to have the desire to market garden, which we don't currently have. We could have started hops or grapes, but that's a trellis infrastructure question. We could have started in sheep, for example, but we have amazing populations of coyotes around us. I mean, so you've got to make out this big list of what would actually fit the resources that you have access to. The dark horse in our situation is that I'm 3/4 of a mile down the road from an established family farm with tractors, equipment, buildings, and infrastructure. That makes a difference as well. So don't only think about the stuff that you have right there on your land. Think about the stuff that you might be able to share with family, with neighbors, etc. There's a couple other things that are pretty doggone important in addition to the physical resources. One is financial resources. If you don't have a little bit of working capital to sort of get the ball rolling until your first farm sales, you're going to be in trouble. I mean, very few things in agriculture are immediate turnaround. The quickest is probably, microgreens or sprouts that only take a week or two to grow and then start selling. That's going to be your fastest possible thing. Most other things are going to take several weeks, several months, or even a whole growing season before you have the sales. Also, access to a marketplace where you can actually sell what you produce. If you don't have these two things, all those other resources on your list are just kind of possessions with potential. Zach or Nathan, if you could tell people to... Oh, you are telling people to jump out and jump back in. Thank you. I appreciate it. That's the best I can recommend as well. Okay, the other thing that I want you to remember is your human resources. Your skills and abilities are resources as well, of course. The frustrating thing about human resources is that you never seem to have all you want. Consider the expression that I heard from one of our mentors on campus, which is, experience is that thing you get immediately after you needed it the most. I find that to be very, very true. In farming, it's very seldom that a person can embody all the skills and abilities necessary to grow their business. Farmers have often been considered Jacks or Jills of all trades, and that's never been more true than today. especially with the explosion of technology in agriculture and all types of agriculture. So what I want you to do is consider all the different types of expertise that have to go into having a farm. You don't have to be a one-man band in this. You can have a team of experts and technical assistance providers that help fill in some of these resource gaps that you don't have just on your own, or you and your spouse, or you and your farm partner, or whatever. Bring in a lawyer, bring in a tax accountant, a graphic designer. If you can't fix your tractor, you're going to need a mechanic. And one of the best things you can probably bring in terms of assistance is a mentor farmer. Or even a group of mentor farmers if you're lucky enough to be in an area where there's kind of a peer network of small-scale and alternative farmers. You don't have to be a one-man band. You do not have to be an island and do this all on your own. Matter of fact, I kind of worry about farmers who keep themselves, doing it all themselves, because it's isolating. And I don't want that to be a limiting factor on the growth of your business. Perhaps more so than anything, I try to gain a feel for the level of passion my clients bring to the table. A person with overwhelming passion and drive to do a farm business is even more likely to succeed in starting up a farm enterprise than a person with a lot of resources or a person with a lack of commitment. It has to be a combination of both. But that being said, fire in the belly is much more useful when it's channeled through the lens of experience. So if you're passionate like this kid is about spinach farming, and you're passionate about spinach from the nutritive standpoint and the culinary standpoint, and you want to start a movable high tunnel spinach farm, but you've never grown a plant in your life, crawl before you walk. Get an internship on a vegetable farm or a CSA farm if that's what you want to do. Work for a successful farmer who's already grown in high tunnels. Work for somebody who's established themselves in the local marketplace. Basically, it's a great opportunity to accelerate your learning curve, to make mistakes, well, frankly, make them on someone else's dime rather than your own when you can't weather mistakes. And then you can use all that resulting knowledge to start your own farm when you're much further down the path than you otherwise would have. Obviously, a lot of the people I'm talking to today, and a lot of the people I talk to on a weekly basis, has the ability to just go and get a job on a farm for a couple of years. I mean, they have a day job. I have a day job. So there are those situations where you're going to have to start while you're doing something else without getting an on-farm job. Okay, but there's a lot to be learned even from things like strategic volunteering on farms. Go and help a vegetable farmer weed once a week and ask lots of questions. Help somebody build their new high tunnel. Help somebody be sales staff at a farmer's market booth. That's a great chance for insight into the local marketplace. Or at the very least, buy local. Start a CSA, go to the farmer's market, whatever. At least get a little bit of market insight before you start your production. Alright, speaking of market insight, marketing people say marketing is everything. I don't know if I'd go quite that far, but I would definitely say it's the linchpin that makes everything else work. The quotation that I've come across is, without customers, a business is out of business. So yeah, I mean, you do, especially in the alternative marketplace where you're not taking a commodity and dumping it at the elevator or something, you got to sell, you got to hustle, you got to pound pavement. So I hate saying the term market research because it's eye-glazing. It's one of those terms that make people think of national surveys and statistical analysis and, ad men and gray suits and things like that. But we have to be willing to, shed the trappings of this black box. Market research doesn't have to be that formal or intimidating. It's basically anything we can do to better understand what our customers want and how they're likely to behave. there are some sources of like third-party national data that are useful. The USDA, the ERS, Economic Research Service, and AMS, Agricultural Marketing Service, those both have a lot of third-party national data that has some serious detail about prices paid, characteristics, market size, all that for a lot of different things that we grow even on small farms. I can get immense amount of information about, for example, our little egg farm. What are eggs selling for this week and where and what characteristics are commanding premium prices? You can download all that stuff from USDA. And if you want to figure out where some of those things are, I can email you. So just drop me a note. But what that's really doing is understanding the larger order trends in the marketplace. And what I want you to think about is locally, what do people want to buy, and therefore what should you grow? So this picture is just an example of a dot survey at a farmer's market. Now, this is probably, a market manager trying to figure out what people come to the market for. But there's nothing saying that a farmer can't do this. A flip chart with some stickers, that people like stickers, with a simple, to-the-point question: how much did you spend today? 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 50. What did you buy today like this one? What is missing at the market today? I mean, if they can answer a simple question, this is a really useful way to get some of that market intelligence. You can go a little bit more high-tech. You can have a survey on your phone or your iPad or whatever. That's all a distinct possibility. You got to be willing not only to pound the pavement to sell, but before you have anything to sell, you got to figure out which pavement to pound. So do your market research. Just if you don't know, ask. All right? So another place that I love to do my sort of market research, my reconnaissance, is at a local retail store. You can really kind of get, so if you're not planning on selling direct to consumer and you want to go through an intermediated marketplace like a restaurant or a retail store, where does your product fit in the existing hierarchy? If I want to sell dozens of eggs and my main competition is the great value stuff at Walmart, I got to think about the price point that provides. But what if I start to think about some of the other characteristics that my product embodies? Is it organic? Is it free range? Is it pastured? Is it whatever? So cage-free, will that get me a premium? Organic cage-free, will that get me a premium? Go a little further and go the non-generic route and the branding, vegetarian fed, various vitamins. What does that get me? Again, certified organic version of that. And then sort of the top tier, these birds have no antibiotics, vegetarian fed, free to roam outdoors, etc., etc. And the organic version of that, where do you fit in your product's hierarchy? I guess it'd be your food chain, so to speak, pardon the pun. But as we know, I'm all about puns. So once you know what opportunities the local market holds, can you make money at that price? How many units are sold at each of those different price points? Can you keep up with that demand? What do you need to do in terms of labeling and packaging to be able to participate in that marketplace? Important questions to ask yourself, all right? Especially before you start investing in productive infrastructure. So there, you figure out where those market opportunities intersect with your skills, the resources that we talked about, and your passion. And that is going to hopefully drastically narrow down the choices that make sense for you to have a small farm enterprise. And it'll kind of point out where the potential is, too. Another big question to ask in the go or no-go decision is, will your business pay? This is where that back of the envelope financial projection is essential. You've got to sketch out your pathway to profitability with as much accuracy as you possibly can. And that's challenging, especially if you're talking about something that you've never done before. So you got to think about your product, think about the price point you can sell it in the local marketplace, what's your cost of production and marketing, and if so, is there a profit margin? What is the overhead related to that? And also, once you get all those projections lined out, what happens if your costs double, because we tend to be a little bit more conservative in thinking about what our cost of production might be, and it tends to be a little bit more expensive in the first year. So if I double my cost of production, do I still have any margin left in that price that I receive? So again, an example. You want to sell dozens of eggs. So my costs, and these are not exactly mine, but they are ballpark, I got per dozen eggs about $1 in feed and $1 in labor in each of those dozens. Okay, you can see the math there. 20 cents a pound times 170 pounds going into 600 chickens, resulting in however many dozen eggs that shrinks down to 35 saleable dozens. Okay, that takes us 3.5 hours. And these are rounded numbers that make the math work nicely. Packaging costs money. Cartons, labels, stickers, whether you're printing them or ordering them or whatever, everybody's going to be involved in some kind of packaging in all likelihood if they're trying to build their brand. Whether it is a nice colored rubber band on up to a twisty tie with your farm name on up to something with full-fledged UPCs and nutrition facts. So packaging is going to fit in there. And then marketing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. What do I mean by marketing? There is a cost to the gas that it takes to get to the farmer's market, to the booth that you have to buy and the coolers you have to buy to sell at the farmer's market. There's a cost to your time at the farmer's market. I mean, all of those things are going to be marketing costs, and they are going to be very pertinent to your situation. So just for me to be able to break even, and that's not even including overhead, on a dozen eggs, I got to receive a price of about $2.75. Is that viable in your marketplace or in my marketplace? Big question mark. This is one way that I use to, and the link will be in the PDF as well. This is a farm to school distribution cost calculator on a spreadsheet. And basically what I'm trying to get across here is if you put down your commodity, you put down your selling price, the number of units that you're selling, the time it takes you to get to your place, the labor rate, etc., plus the mileage and depreciation that goes into using your vehicle, you can break out the distribution cost per unit. And then the margin relating to that. So don't forget about your marketing costs, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Your time, your gas, your depreciation, all of those things have a cost to them. And if you're only covering your production costs and not covering your marketing costs, you are either subsidizing your farm with your personal income or you are going into the red. Even after all of this, you're going to have to think about which fixed costs your enterprises need to be able to cover in order to be profitable as well. But for the time being, leaving that out, depreciation costs and loan servicing costs and all that kind of stuff, utilities, think about what do you want to make in EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, fancy MBA word that nobody really needs to know, but it was a short way to say it. So if I've got $1 a dozen in margin, like I talked about, and I want to make 20 grand, and that financial goal is where everybody should begin. Think about that financial goal. How much are you trying to make in a year's time off of your farm? Are you trying to be full-time? If so, what is it going to cost you to be full-time? What could you make in a different job? If you're thinking about part-time and growing sort of slowly and organically, then maybe that number doesn't have to be as high. So let's say I want to make 20 grand, all right, and I get $1 a dozen in margin. And you can replace this dozen eggs with anything. It can be a pound of beets. It could be, a case of broccoli. It could be hamburger patties, whatever it is that you're moving from your farm. Let's say I got $1 a dozen in margin. I got to sell 20,000 dozens a year to make that 20 grand. So I have to back calculate from that how many eggs per day do I need to get that many saleable dozens in a year. All right? I've got to factor in shrink, because there is going to be shrink of almost any kind of farm product. Whether your produce goes bad after sitting in the at the farmer's market for 5 hours and has to go on the compost pile, whether it's a broken egg, whether it's a package that got perforated in the freezer or whatever, there's a ton of reasons that there's going to be shrink. So you got to guess approximately what is your shrink likely to be, and then factor that out into, okay, I need almost 1,000 birds in order to get that number of saleable dozens to make $20,000 a year. But don't just do that calculation. Think about, okay, if I'm going to sell 20,000 dozens, how do I do that? How do I move 385 dozens per week? And at the places that I have options to sell those things, can I actually make the margin that I anticipate? So just some back of the envelope math is essential in whether or not you're going to do this. Okay, so that's the go or no-go type of decision. If you are already there, if you've already made the go decision, you got to think about financing. How am I going to start this thing? How do I muster the financial resources to start doing it? Well, the most common question that I get from the people that call me up is there a grant to start up my farm business? I wish. Put this in perspective. You're starting a small, private, for-profit business. And this is primarily designed to provide you and your family income and lifestyle benefits and maybe even some long-run wealth. Yeah, I mean, there can be environmental benefits, there can be community benefits to a small alternative farm, but that's not strictly required. So you got to think about all the other mom and pop businesses on Main Street or wherever, and do they get free money to start their businesses? Unfortunately, not very often. And unfortunately, small farms aren't that much different. There's going to be some initial investment to get started. And if you have a hard time surviving on what you predict to be cash flow and profitability, maybe there isn't a lot of reason to make this investment. Okay? The grants that farmers do receive tend to be for something like scholarly experiments or demonstration projects that they do on their farm, and that's often in conjunction with, university researchers and other types like that. And maybe they get some perks from this arrangement, maybe an honorarium, a specialized piece of equipment, but usually it's just knowledge that they can apply to their farm. So that, even though it's very useful and very valuable, it doesn't necessarily help that much with financing a startup. So, yeah. If you don't think you can make a go of your small farm startup without grants, using some of the other financial instruments I'll talk about here, then you got a question about whether or not it's a good idea. Okay, so aside from grants, there are some other unique financial opportunities that are made available to farmers specifically. Cost share programs are out there, and there's some pretty sweet ones. The NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, does have a program that they call EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And the organic initiative within that does have a program for cost sharing the cost of high tunnels used in vegetable production. It's under a soil quality type of title. So that's a really neat opportunity to get part of a high tunnel paid for. There's a limited amount of funds and you've got to apply for them. They're not guaranteed, but why not try it out? There's also some neat individual development accounts out there, IDAs. Some nonprofit organizations will match a farmer's savings towards a specific purchase or goal. There's one here on the northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin border called the Farm Asset Builder, right here in the picture. There's another one through the Practical Farmers of Iowa. So if one of those types of things is available in your area, that's a useful resource. But sometimes you got to think about the conventional tools that are available to you. There are lenders that specialize in dealing with farm operations. Think about Farm Credit Services. Think about the FSA, the Farm Services Agency. There's sometimes even micro-enterprise lenders, depending on your community. Those might sound like the financing tools that a typical farm might go after, and they are. And there is the occasion that you might have to educate that lender about what it is that you want to do and how there is a pathway to profitability, but they still have the charge to work with you. The FSA specifically has a microloan program that's really pretty cool and can help a lot of beginners get going. So think about that. They have low rates, they have technical expertise. So those loans, even though a lot of people really, really hate debt, can actually be quite a good tool, a smart tool for financing a startup. So what do you do when you're just getting started? You don't have a whole lot of expertise or experience. You don't get a grant. You don't get a loan. Well, first and foremost, we already mentioned, you keep your day job. Most farmers have a day job. You scrape together whatever you can from personal savings, from generous family members, sympathetic benefactors, cash and savings bonds, sell your old junk on Craigslist, you raid the couch cushions for loose change, you donate plasma like you did in college when you needed beer money. And then when you've got this little pool of funds, you figure out how you can start your selected enterprise at the smallest scale possible that can still provide a positive cash flow. You plant your first crop, you buy your first breeding livestock, you eventually sell your first products to your first paying customers, and you start to build a brand. And then you plow every single thing you make back into that business and you grow. This is called bootstrapping. It's slow. It's hard. But it honestly is the way that most small businesses in the country have gotten started. And that's been true for quite a long time. So don't eliminate this as a possibility. There are ways to start small and grow organically. Okay. So that was sort of the go or no go, the finances, and now I want to talk about a little bit of nitty gritty that is pretty much required if you want to be a legit farm business. So, like I said, this is going to be a quick breeze over the top of a lot of these topics. In order to be a business, there are a few things that are the trappings of farm business. What really sucks is that, of course, at the same time you're trying to figure out your production and marketing side of your business, you're just getting that off the ground and you feel busier than you've ever been before, you have to start paying attention to some of this other stuff, rules and regulations and record keeping that come along with being a business. So the long and short of this is treat a business like a business if you want to have the benefits of being a business. Create separate bank accounts for the farm. Select accounting software if you're a computer person. Form a business entity, whether it's a sole proprietorship, a partnership, an LLC. We'll talk about some of those. Be insured. Have the licenses and certificates you need. Keep records, for the love of God. And then, once you know that you are going to be on the path to making this thing a business, file your first Schedule F. Your 1040 Schedule F, profit or loss from farming, and pay your taxes as appropriate. All of these things, if you do these things, you are all of a sudden a farm business. For better or for worse, some situations, but these are what you need to do. So, briefly, each one of these things. Why bother keeping records? You got to figure out whether or not you're profitable at the end of the year. You're going to want to figure out your break-evens. You got to be sure that what you're selling is actually making you margin, or know which things are not if they're loss leaders. You got to figure out which market channels, farmers market, farm stand, CSA, etc. If you're doing all of these things, which ones are actually providing acceptable returns? And those that are, you keep, and those that are not, you cut. You want to pay appropriate taxes, and you also want to be able to sleep at night, knowing that these 16, 18, 20-hour days are actually paying off at the end of the year. So what records do I keep? He keeps talking about record keeping. What do I actually write down? Most things. All things that are related to income and expenses for your farm. You really do need to record pretty much everything that's related to a transaction or a cost that goes on for your farm. Insurance, interest, rent, repairs, services, supplies. All of these things are categories that are on the bottom of your Schedule F. If you've never looked at a Schedule F, and I put one on there as an attachment, look at the farm expenses category in Part 2 towards the bottom of that form, and you will start to see some of the things that the IRS is going to keep track of in terms of farm expenses. There's also that wonderful other expenses category number 32. I hate to say it, but even with this long list of categories, you are going to be making other categories for your farm. Thinking about, I don't know, advertising, web hosting, donations to nonprofits, etc. Yeah, the list could go on. But use your Schedule F as a starting point. Use that to set up your accounting system and add categories as you need. Speaking of accounting systems, there's a ton of them out there. Maybe you're old school with the paper ledger, and that's fine. That's totally fine. I try to be more efficient because, well, it's not efficiency. It's mostly that I hate paper. And I like doing things on the computer because it's usually quicker for me. And there's a ton of options out there for accounting systems. QuickBooks is sort of the granddaddy. It's the Cadillac. That has an immense amount of capabilities. There's other ones that are out there in the marketplace competing with them. Xero, Xero, FreshBooks, Wave Accounting. All of these have different features, different price points. I use Wave because I'm cheap and it's free if I'm not accepting credit cards through it. So that's kind of nice. So basically, if you're not really fastidious about writing things down in a check register or a ledger or whatever, one of these products that is connected via the internet to your farm bank account and categorizes your expenses automatically, that can really make your tax appointment at the end of the year go a heck of a lot faster. But if you're trying to do everything like billing and payroll and credit card acceptance and all that stuff, expect to pay a fee for premium services. And pretty much every alternative ag type of farmer that I encounter, I have never heard anybody say that the accounting software that they use is enough by itself. They also are generally creating themselves a spreadsheet. And that might be it's usually for production, it's also for sales, it's the kind of record keeping that fits your farm appropriately because you designed it firsthand for your farm. I highly recommend, if you're not a spreadsheet person right now, to find an online tutorial and learn how to use them. People who use spreadsheets are going to take over the world someday, in my opinion, my humble opinion. But what this does, it keeps exactly the data using exactly the calculations that an individual farm needs without the extraneous noise, and the only learning curve is learning to use the spreadsheet itself. And the cool thing about this is, like, I use a cloud-based spreadsheet on Google Drive. This is the spreadsheet that my wife and I use to keep our farm records regarding eggs. I made this on my computer, I shared editing rights with my wife, and we update it from our phones while we're doing our work, hers being an iPhone and mine being an Android. It's free, it's always saved, and really all you need is a Google account, which many of you already have already. So, yeah, cloud-based spreadsheets, really, really useful as far as being organized and keeping your records. There is one thing that a lot of farmers miss. Do you notice the trend here? Hours. Honestly, a lot of farmers don't want to break down what they're getting paid per hour. Because with so many hours invested, the rate can be sort of depressingly low. But that ignorance isn't really bliss. It helps you kind of place what kind of value you're sacrificing, your opportunity cost, what your lifestyle benefits need to be worth in order to keep doing this. So, even if you do everything yourself and you plow all your profits back in the farm, it's worthwhile to know how many hours are spent for each, unit of sales that you have. Okay? If you don't know your true opportunity cost, you might consider using an hourly rate that you would pay a high school kid, for example. When I have to pay somebody when I have to do a labor calculation, I don't think about what I make per hour as a state employee. I think about what I'd have to pay a high school kid to do that farm task. Okay? So it's a $10 an hour rate rather than, 11 or what or whatever it is I'm making as a state employee. Another nifty feature of that same Google Drives is the Forms app. Forms attaches to the spreadsheet, and it's basically a stripped down survey builder, and you can use it to input a response. So John Hendrickson, he's with University of Wisconsin's Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems, at Madison. He also has a diversified fruit and vegetable farm called the Stone Circle Farm. He uses a Google form for his employees to keep track of the amount of time spent on any given activity for any given crop. And so let's say they just spent 2 hours in the greenhouse on onion transplants. Then they can mark down greenhouse, they can mark down onions, and they will, then at the end of the year, he will have a good idea of how much labor expense went into any individual crop and whether it's paying for itself. It's a neat trick, and John has a little tutorial on YouTube here as well, and you'll be able to see the link later. Whoever else is touching the arrows, or I might have timing. Sorry, I don't mean to be switching back and forth on you guys. The reason that John keeps that level of detail, which is a lot more than what a lot of people keep on their farms, and I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's just a true thing. He uses this tool called Veggie Compass, and once you get yourself to the level of spreadsheet ninja, okay, that's an official designation. And you really want to know how much each crop is costing you and how much each market channel is making you, this is a fabulous tool that's free to download from CIS to help figure out some of that stuff. It is also a really intimidating giant spreadsheet. If you are a diversified fruit and vegetable grower, I highly recommend this tool once you get to the level of expertise where you can keep all the information it needs. And you will be vastly more informed regarding the profitability of your enterprise than the vast majority of your peers. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that data, if you keep it, is a really, really valuable thing, but it's especially valuable if you turn it into information that helps you make decisions. Real quick insurance. You need to have insurance as a farm, okay? And there are farm policies that are out there, and they're interesting. They're hybrid products. They combine personal and commercial side of insurance. They combine the property and the casualty side of insurance. They're a really wide-ranging product, but they don't include everything. So the average farm policy will cover your house, any appurtenant structures, garages, things like that, and the household personal property that you have delineated on that policy. It'll also cover your barn, your farm buildings, your pole barn, whatever, and any farm personal property that's within those. So that's an important thing. There are a few exceptions to that. Some farm policies will exclude, for example, a brooder lamp, because they've determined that those are high liability. They won't cover a still for distilling alcohol, I mean, surprise. The casualty side, you got to think, you have to think at least a little bit. I don't know if I want to recommend that you dwell on this, but you got to think at least a little bit how somebody could get hurt by what it is that you are doing on your home, on your farm, and in your sales. Personal liability is what you carry anyway in case somebody gets hurt at your house. Farm liability is what you carry if somebody gets hurt coming onto your farm. Okay, they trip in a gopher hole when they're going to your farm stand. Yeah, that's going to cover some of the typical medical expenses. So you want to make sure that you have those things. The thing that is hard about that is that most of us will be selling farm product away from the farm. And not every farm policy, as a matter of fact, probably pretty few farm policies, will cover product sales and product liabilities made away from the farm. So if you go to a farmer's market and sell something that gets somebody sick, it may not be covered under your farm policy because it wasn't sold on your farm. The take-home message of that is to have an insurance company, an agent that you trust completely, and tell them in a long conversation every single thing that you do related to your farm. Production, post-harvest, sales and marketing. They need to know every step. And they need to know what buildings and equipment you're using at every step and who is doing those steps. And make sure that once you tell them all those things, that they say what is covered is documented somewhere, so that in the case of a lawsuit somewhere down the road, you have paper documentation saying that this is a covered thing. You're still going to have workers' compensation insurance if you've got employees. If you're growing traditional crops like corn or beans or other field crops, there is options for crop insurance. There are a few options for crop insurance for other alternative type of products, but they do require several years of records. So back to our original point, make sure that you are doing well with your record keeping. And lastly, ask your insurance agent whether all the stuff that you have in place already is enough. Because if you guys agree that it's still not enough, that you still need some additional coverage above and beyond what the other policies you have cover, an umbrella policy for the farm is actually pretty cheap, to get $1 million or $2 million. It's not that much per year to pay for that additional umbrella. So, insurance is a must. We're dealing with food, something that people are putting in their faces and making a part of them, and the risk of foodborne illness is there. And we all have to be aware of that. So the big thing that a lot of people start down this path because of is taxes. People know that losses incurred as a business tend to be tax deductible, whereas losses incurred by virtue of a hobby are not tax deductible. But you've got to remember that you've got to prove that your farm is a business and not a hobby, something that you're doing for a lifestyle. There are things that the IRS will ask you in order to figure out whether or not what you're doing is actually a business as opposed to just a hobby. They will ask about the pathway to profitability. Have you been profitable previously? Are you how many out of 5 years are you profitable? They'd really like to see that sort of profitability in 3 out of 5 years. Is that essential? If you have more than 3 years to get to profitability and you exhibit that you're, devoting a lot of time and you're making changes to improve your profitability of your enterprise, you're still probably going to be able to get by. Are you doing all your accounting separate? Is your business entity separate from your personal assets? Do you have the training and experience necessary to make a go of this in a business format? You want to make sure that you can have the right answers to these questions because you do not want to have to pay back taxes that were otherwise not incurred in previous years because you said it was a business when it was not. If you're going to claim it as a business, treat it as a business. There are sales taxes as well. Here in Illinois, specifically, food for consumption off the premises, aka groceries, things that are not for immediate consumption, have a 1% tax rate. Many of us will be selling food. But there is a general tax rate around in Illinois of 6.25% that applies to all prepared food, things that are going to be eaten on the premises at a restaurant or something like that. So you have got to make sure that what you are selling is being taxed at the appropriate rate, and you are remitting those sales taxes to the state at the appropriate rate. And there are funny little gray areas. If you have a pumpkin patch, the pumpkins that you sell for pie, those are groceries. Those are going to be taxed at a 1% rate. The pumpkins that you sell for jack-o'-lanterns, those are fall decorations, not groceries or food, and they're going to be at the 6.25% rate. So you have to delineate those things in your accounting system. If you sell more than 50% prepared food anyway, if you've got a farm stand and you sell a few vegetables, but your big business is in, cupcakes, then you're going to have to think about the higher tax rate. Hot food, I mentioned that already, and make sure that there are going to be county-specific and municipality-specific tax rates. Make sure that you know what those things are, or tax policies, I should say. Know what they are. Lastly, in terms of eye-blurring businessy stuff, think about business entities. So a farm, by default, it's going to be a sole proprietorship. And here in Illinois, we have a couple of different options for business entities. So the sole proprietor thing is the automatic one. That you start a farm, unless you tell somebody differently, you're going to be a sole proprietor. The interesting thing about business entities is you can be in a business entity that separates your liability from your business's liability. And the ones that do that include the limited liability company and the corporation. So the pool of assets that are yours and the pool of assets that are your business's are going to be separated, at least on paper. So if somebody goes after and sues you, there should be a limitation as to what they can get their hands on. So that's a very useful thing. That separation is a very useful thing. It needs to be done appropriately with an appropriate agreement or paperwork or whatever with the state, so make sure that you're doing your due diligence if you start one of these business entities, that you do it right. The other thing that people start business entities oftentimes for is for the tax component of it. LLCs and corporations are the common source of confusion. Proprietorships and sole proprietorships and partnerships, you're reporting those on your own taxes at the end of the year. LLCs and S corps. Well, so the reason that some of these elections were created is because C corps are subject to double taxation. They pay income tax on its income and also capital gains tax to the shareholders. S corps and LLCs are pass-through entities where the double taxation thing will not happen. So that's the reason that a lot of people look at those. It's also due to, the complexity of the businesses that they're doing. Most of the farms that I encounter in Illinois are starting out as sole proprietorships or LLCs. There is one big difference, and that's an LLC costs a heck of a lot more to maintain on a year-on-year basis. And I'm running out of time here. So make sure you have simplicity, flexibility, and cost that's appropriate to your operation. Make sure that if you want your business to live into the future, that it is a business entity that can survive your passing. Have a lawyer and do your due diligence. I'm not going to go into a lot more detail about those. If you look at a resource called Farm Commons, they have incredible technical assistance materials regarding business entities. And I would be remiss if I didn't say at least one thing about the future of your farm. It's really easy to get caught up in some of these nitty-gritty details. Farms always have fires that need to be put out, okay? Don't forget to think about where you want your farm to be 5 years down the road and have those objectives in mind so that in addition to just sort of the turn-by-turn directions on a day-by-day basis, you also have a compass point that is pointing you in the direction somewhere down the road. So I'm going to stop there. We've got a couple of minutes for questions. I'm sorry I had to slide through a lot of that fast, but yeah, let's see what we can get done in another 2 or 3 minutes here, Nathan.
All right, we did have one question here from Barb over in the last one there in the chat box regarding kind of when are you a business compared to when should you just be have things for home use?
Yeah. So if you're primarily using things for home use, there's not necessarily a strong reason to start a business entity. I mean, if it's primarily a hobby, if you're not deriving a lot of income and you're not putting in massive investment into it, then there's nothing wrong with leaving it at the hobby scale. The time to there is not a real reason that it would be difficult to convert to a business later. As a matter of fact, several years of experience might make it easier. But you will want to, once you start making large investments in your productive infrastructure and you can see a pathway to profitability in the space of the next 3 to 5 years, that's when you want to start thinking, maybe I should figure out and fill out the Schedule F at the end of the year. Maybe I should go to a tax accountant that does farm taxes. Or at least ask them whether or not this is the year that I should start filing farm taxes. Yes, we are going to be sending out the link. Absolutely. It'll come via email. What else is out there, Nathan?
Someone's asking about a PDF of PowerPoint slides.
Sure. I can attach that to the follow-up. No trouble at all.
All right. And we have one question there from Amy we will get to. I guess before we get to that, I'll go ahead and kind of just wrap things up. And thank you, Andy, for giving us this presentation from up in the great north compared to at least where I'm at in Illinois.
It is snowing here, Nathan.
Well, it's sunny and 75 down here. So. Back at you. Anyhow, we hope that everyone got some good information today, and just as far as better idea of where you're going to be with starting your farm as an actual business. So we will be, as we mentioned, sending out an email just here as soon as we get the recorded version all processed and ready for you. And so that will give you access to it through the Local Food Systems Small Farms Team YouTube channel, along with you can find all of our other previous webinars at the YouTube channel as well. And we will have a short evaluation. Again, we'd appreciate you filling out because we really do value your feedback. So with that, we appreciate everyone joining us today, and certainly have a wonderful season. Andy, if you want to hang on, I think we can go ahead and quit the recording, and if others have a few questions, you can go to address